Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Thanks for being here, guys. We're going to talk about some 351 swap fuel system issues that will hopefully make things easier for some of you guys moving forward with your swap. So when you're doing a 351 swap, a lot of it depends on what your car has to begin with. Now, what I'm talking about is your fuel system. So you can see here that I have dash or AN lines feeding my system from right here. What you can't see is that through right down here, it goes through the fender well and to some 1/2-inch stainless steel lines that I ran all the way up here. Now, depending on what sanctioning body, if any, that you race in, you can only have a certain amount of flexible fuel line on your car. So you have to be cautious of that. What I would suggest is, depending on what your car starts with, kind of go from there. So if you, like, this was a V6 originally. And initially I did use the V6 lines. So a lot of what you're capable of doing kind of depends on your end goal. You know, if you're just trying to get a standard 351 cams, head, intake, you know, stuff like that, either the V6 or the V8 fuel lines, the factory ones, will work. You don't have to upgrade that stuff. And the other cool thing is that most times your fuel line will come into the car. I've got a lot of other stuff in the way, sorry, supercharged, but most times your fuel lines will come in on this side here, so they'll be right kind of in this area. And you'll be able to use, Russell has some adapters, and Earl's probably makes them too, but you can get them off Summit or Jegs or Speedway Motors or Amazon, wherever you want to get them. But there are lines that will, or adapters that will plug into the factory fuel line, and then they will actually so plug into the factory fuel line, and then it'll have a AN fitting on the other end. And I'll show you, let me grab the one that I've got. And I will show you one of the adapters that I use, and I don't know if I have the rest of them or not. But I'll leave some links in the descriptions, and I'll try to throw some pictures up here in the video, just so you guys kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about. But you can see, so this is what I did on my factory fuel system. This is a factory 5-liter Mustang fuel filter. So you can see on this guy, they make adapters that will plug right into or onto, depending on what style it is, and then you can go right to an AN line, dash 8, dash 10, whatever you want to do. You can kind of see how that setup is. But they also make some that go onto the inside of the factory fitting. So instead of going over these lines, the other ones that are internal, that connect from the hard line to the fuel rail, they make those fittings as well. So if you don't have the right size, if your fuel line, like let's say typically a V8 fuel line will come in up over here, a V6 will come in sometimes over on the passenger side or driver's side, if I remember right. But they come in different spots. So what you'll probably have to do is use some of these fittings and some AN line to connect wherever the factory lines are located at to wherever your fuel rail is. That would be the easiest way, and that's actually how I had mine initially. And then I have since upgraded. I did 1/2-inch stainless steel lines and dash 10 AN, so that's a far cry from where I came from. But that's probably, in my opinion, the simplest way to connect your factory lines to the fuel rail. Now, the fuel rails themselves, depending on what you're going to go with or what your horsepower goals are, your factory 302 fuel rail will actually work. You just have to make a cut down the I guess it's like a poly line that connects the two metal rails. So there's typically a soft line-ish that will connect the two different fuel rails together. So you can cut that soft line and use some fuel-injected rated hose and some fuel-injected clamps and connect both of the front, and also you'll have to do it in the back as well. So if you're on a budget, you can do it that way. The other thing you can do is get a fuel rail off of a 351 from a truck. Now the only thing that I will caution you on is that the fuel pressure regulator is on the other side for a truck. So it's right over here, and it'll hit most 302 or 351 intakes unless you do like a bread box like this or a different intake manifold. So you kind of have to, depending on what intake manifold you choose to use, you have to use the appropriate fuel rail. So you can either get one from a 351 on a truck, or you can get use the 302, the factory one. You can use that one as long as you widen the lines between the two fuel rails, and I believe it's 8 to 10 inches of line that I used between them when I did that. So those are a couple of different fuel rail options. Now the rest of the system, as far as your fuel pump and everything, that should all be fine. So you'll have to use the correct ECU, but your wiring should all work, so that the pump that's in the tank will work, as long as you're not, you might have to upgrade to a 255 or something like that, but all of that stuff will work just fine. You just have to make sure that the pump you have, if you have a 4-cylinder pump, you'll probably have to upgrade to like a 255 or a 190 at least from a 302 to make the 351 work. That would be the only other thing that I would caution you on there. And if you do have any issues with your fuel system, I've got a video. I'll put a link right up here to the other video I have, but it's for the fuel system electrical layout and wiring. So if you do have issues when you do your swap, I'll put a link up here. I'll put a little card so that you guys can click on that video and troubleshoot some of the issues you might be having. So that should cover you. That's all the way from the tank, the pump, wiring, all the way up to the fuel lines here, and then up to the fuel rail here. The fuel pressure regulator, you can use a factory, whichever fuel rail you use. If you use like a 302 factory one, you can use a stock 302 fuel pressure regulator, and if you use one from a truck, that one works fine too. That's not really a big deal. The fuel pressure is pretty much the same. Now, if you decide to go wild, like I did in my case, the factory fuel lines for a 302 will support up to about 500 or 600 horsepower, give or take. If you're running ethanol, obviously it's going to be less. But you can use those factory lines for up to that horsepower level. And you could probably squeeze a little bit more out of it. I wouldn't be willing to, but obviously that's going to depend on when you're tuning it, see what your duty cycle is, and if you're running out of fuel pressure at higher RPMs, you probably have to change it. But anyways, what I would suggest, if you're going to go with a combination that's under 600 horsepower, is use the factory 302 lines if you have them. The V6 ones probably, I'm not sure of the size of them. I think they're all 5/16 if I remember right. So they should all work. You can use those lines. You'll just have to make sure that you do what I suggested earlier and connect them with all of the fittings that you would need. So if you're going for something in excess of 500 or 600 horsepower, you're going to need upgraded lines. That's in my setup. I did that almost immediately after I got everything done. I upgraded. So this is yeah, you can't really see it. Sorry, I don't have a good enough light right now, but you got one line that comes in and then a return line that goes back out. I kept the return style fuel system, and then it's worked really good. And I added an external fuel pressure sending unit for my gauge that's in the car, but that's neither here nor there. So under 500-600 horsepower, you can use factory lines. Just use the fittings as I suggested earlier. Make sure that you do your research on what kind of combination you want to run. Heads cam intake will probably get you right around the 450 mark, kind of depending on what you use. So you should be able to use all the factory lines. Much more than that, if you add boost, nitrous, stuff like that, you'll have to add some supplemental fuel lines or kind of upgrade the system depending on what you do. Guys, if you have any questions comments, concerns, or if you've got any other helpful information, please drop it in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And as always, thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate the support. Have a good one, and we will see you later.